Hi, and welcome back to our channel, Pay Down Debt Solutions. I'm Jen, and today I want to get into more about credit cards with you guys. We keep getting questions about credit cards and how to run credit card strategies because you guys know that with Velocity Banking, you can win with credit cards. So, when you revolve your credit card, you evolve your finances. And that's exactly what Dan and I did when we were trying to get ourselves out of debt. So I want to go into credit cards with you. I want to dig into them a little bit more. I want to talk about, how credit cards work and how they can give you cash flow because we get lots of questions about, how this works. How does it give you cash flow, right? And then what I want to do is get into the nitty gritty and the depth and in detail about, what happens inside of a credit card and how your interest rate and your payment amount is figured. And then we're going to discuss a student scenario with you where we have a woman who is in a little bit of financial, trouble. She's struggling and she wants to get out of some of this credit card debt, but she doesn't have a whole lot of money to work with. As you can see, she has $46 of cash flow. So we're going to try to give her cash flow today, working with just credit cards, okay? Just the cards that she has. So let's get into today really working into credit cards and talking about credit cards. All right. So when I talk to you guys about credit cards and I say revolve your credit card and evolve your finances. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, when you revolve something, right? It's like when you look at a revolving door, what does it do? It kind of spins, right? You go in, you go out, you go in, you go out, you go in, you go out. That's the same thing you're doing with your credit card, right? And so when you're in the traditional banking strategy, right? You're doing what you've been taught throughout your life. You've been taught to make your payments, right? You get your income, it comes in, your direct deposit comes in, and you pay your bills out of that, right? So you're paying all your bills and all of your payments right out of your checking account, like you've been taught, good citizens, right? We've been taught this. We've been taught how to bank by the banks, all right? But when we talk about credit cards and running credit cards properly, so proper use of a credit card might seem like, okay, well, I might use my credit card to purchase a few things and then I'm going to, at the end of the month, I'm going to pay my bill, right? That seems like it would be a proper use of a credit card. But when we work with Velocity Banking, there is a different way to work with your credit cards. And this is what I call, and Dan calls, proper use of your credit card, okay? And so that is putting all of your income into that card or all of the income that's available to you and running all of your expenses out of the credit card to thus give you back cash flow, okay? So we're going to talk about that. So when you revolve your credit card, meaning you put money into your credit card and you pay for things out of it, right? That's revolving. So it's not closed ended. That means that you can always spend money on your card so long as there's a line available to you, okay? With loans, you can't do that, can you? When you put money into a loan, right, that payment is then gone, right? It goes into the loan and it helps to work down your interest and your the money that you owed, your principal. So it works down both of those simultaneously. Well, with a credit card, when you put money into the card, you're working down your balance and your interest at the same time, right? And the interest is figured on an average daily balance. So as that balance comes down, your interest rate is going to come down. And again, well, your payment's going to come down too, right? Because if you're working it down and you're putting money into it and you're not charging up the card, then you're going to be working your balance down. And with Velocity Banking, what we learn to do is we learn to put our income into that card and pay our expenses out. And then the payment that would be due on that card is then eliminated, okay? So that is the magic of Velocity Banking, is eliminating that payment and reducing your interest, right? Monthly adding gentle interest charges because you're working it down. That's the magic with Velocity Banking and with credit cards, okay? So we want you guys to stop the minimum monthly payments with our income in and expenses out strategy. You guys have to get out of these minimum payments. It's the minimum payments that is keeping you poor. And I'm going to show you that in detail here in just a few minutes. But when you are paying your minimum payments, you guys are getting stressed and you're getting strapped because your limits are high, right? And then what happens is, you're paying minimum payments and you feel like you're not getting anywhere. It's like that hamster on a wheel feel, right? And then what happens if you're late, right? If you have a late payment, then you get a late payment charge. And that $35 to $39 then gets added on top of that card, and you can't ever get out of it. So it's like fees upon fees upon fees upon interest. And so that gets really stressful. And so we are going to get you guys out of that. And I'm going to show you that those minimum payments can be really detrimental to you, and how then you can get out of doing that and pay your credit card at the same time. Pay it down, I should say, okay? Because you can do it. So when you put your income in and you run your expenses out through this strategy, you will get back that payment as cash flow, okay? So when you're revolving that card and when you're putting your income into that credit card, you are going to get that payment back to you because you are satisfying that payment, and that payment is then no longer due. So when you put your income into that card, that payment becomes cash flow to you that then can work down your credit card minus the interest rate. I will always say that because it is minus the interest rate. Okay, so what Velocity Banking does is Velocity Banking gives you financial power, which leads to your peace, okay? So right now, you guys, you're in a current state. Your current state is financial chaos, right? So there's a lot of you out there that you feel chaotic. You feel like you don't know what's going on. You feel like you don't know what you have coming and going, and it's very stressful because all of these payments are hitting you, right? And so you're making payments and you're not catching up and you're not getting ahead because you just don't have the cash flow. Well, Velocity Banking will help you with that. It will give you cash flow if you run it correctly, okay? So know your finances through learning your budget, right? Through learning your budget. Now, Dan and I tell you that you guys, when you run Velocity Banking, you don't have to pinch your pennies. You can run your life in the way that you're running it today, and you can still get yourself out of debt, all right? So you can. And so does that mean that you have to then, run a tight budget and pinch every penny and, do all of this crazy stuff, right? That helps you that creates you, creates more stress, right? Sometimes working a budget like that will cause stress for you. So you guys, you don't have to do that though. You can still run finances and run your life the way you're running your life and take care of your finances if you do it through Velocity Banking. But you do have to know what your household is doing. You have to know what your bills are. You have to know what your payments are. You have to know all of that, right? Down to the penny, okay? And so that's what we teach with Pay Down Debt Solutions is we teach our three-step strategy, right? First of all, you want to organize your bills, and that is key and pivotal. Key and pivotal in running any kind of budget, obviously, is organizing your finances and knowing what your bills are, okay? And when you do that, you can live within a budget, okay? You can live within the world that you've created because you will have a way to get money back and to pay your debts down through Velocity Banking. So if you know your finances through learning a budget, so what happens is, right? So what comes in, if you know what comes in, and then you know what should be going out. So that's a budget, right? Knowing what comes in and what should be going out, and then keeping to that for the most part, right? So trying to adhere to that, right? So if you adhere to that, then you're not going to have problems, okay? But that doesn't mean that you have to scrimp and scrape necessarily, okay? You might find that you have to, but for the most part, a lot of people, when they enter Velocity Banking, they don't have to do that. They realize that they don't even need to, right? So when you do Velocity Banking and you use credit cards, you guys, credit cards can help you stay on budget, believe it or not. Because think about it, just like your checking account, when you use that debit card from your checking account, you can go back and see everything that you've spent in your account, right? We live in a digital world. We live in the digital age. So you can go back, you can comb through your checking account, and you can see what you have spent your money on. Well, guess what? Same thing with credit cards, right? When you are running all of your expenses through a credit card, you can see exactly what you're doing, right? So first week, you can see how much you've spent. You can see exactly where you've spent your money. Second week, same thing. Third week of the month, same thing. Fourth week, same thing. So you'll be able to tell whether you are on budget or not if you're quickly calculating each week where you're at, right? So you know that there's 4 weeks to a month, and you know what your budget is, if your budget is, $2,000 per se, then you know that you can spend $500 a week, right? So if you spend $500 a week, you can go back and you can look at your credit card statement and you can say, yeah, I'm spending about that. I'm on pace. Or, hey, pretty cool. I was able to save a little bit of money and I didn't spend as much. So I have a little bit of wiggle room. I can spend a little bit more next month if I need to. Or if you're overspending that week, right? If you're overspending, then I got to curtail some things. I got to pull back where I can so that I continuously keep myself on budget each week so that I know by the end of the month, I'm going to be just fine. Okay. And that doesn't necessarily mean you guys have to pinch pennies. All right. I love the fact that credit cards will do all of that for you. Okay. They even split things out into categories so you can really see what you're doing monthly. So I love that these credit cards can do this for us because it keeps things very simple and very easy to run. All right. Okay. So understanding how credit cards are designed will help you. Okay. So understanding exactly how they're designed is going to be a benefit to you. And how so? Well, let's look at the inner workings of the credit card and how your interest is figured. Okay. So once you know that and you know how credit cards are charging you, you will have even more power over what you're doing. And because you're going to understand exactly what your bill is going to be, right? Your charge is going to be and how they figured it. And so that does give you a little bit of power because you then have knowledge about it, right? Okay, so, and I'm pulling this actually from our example, so we're going to use $2,300. So if we have $2,300 balance, let's say, and the interest rate is at a 27%, all right? So how do banks figure your interest rate? Well, they're going to take the $23,000 that you owe, they're going to multiply it by the 27%, okay? And so to do that, you would move it into a decimal and it would be 0.27. So 23,000 times 0.27 is going to give you 6210 per year, okay? So that is an entire year's worth of interest, all right? So then to figure out what you're going to be paying each month in interest, you're going to take that 6210, you're going to divide it by 12, and you're going to get 518. So 518 is monthly what this person would be spending for interest, okay, on a balance of $2,300. That's pretty heavy, right? That's a big interest charge, all right? So credit cards charge you interest plus 1 to 5%, okay? So the 1 to 5% is basically the amount of money that would be going towards your principal, and that is all figured inside of the payment, all right? So here I put in quotations that it's not quotations, in parentheses, sorry, that it's usually 1% because that's normally what it is. It could be anywhere from 1 to 5% though, okay? And so this is on the entire balance. So then how does that work and what does that look like? Well, that means you're going to take $23,000, you're going to multiply it by the 1%, so you move your decimal, so it's 0.01, and that's going to give you $230. So that means towards your principal, $230 is going to go, okay? But what that means is your entire payment for that month is going to be the 518, okay, your interest, plus $230, which is going to give you $748, all right? So that would be your payment for the month if it's figured on 1%. So is that the interest rate though? So the 27%, is that the actual interest rate you're paying? Well, let's talk about something that we call interest volume, okay? So this is going to put things in perspective for you with any, card, right? Any credit card. So this keeps in mind why you don't want to pay your minimum balance and leave it at that. If you have your interest payment is $518 and we divide it by the payment, that means we get a 0.69. So our interest volume is 69%. So of that payment, that means 69% of that payment is interest. Think about that. That is pretty sick when you think about it, right? Because even though you're at a 27% interest rate, your payment, what you're paying in interest for that payment is 70%, just about 70%, okay? Now, there was a time when banks could only charge, 1 to 5%, right? That would be the minimum that they could charge you. Well, now, since COVID actually, banks can charge you as low as 0.25%. Yay, right? That's awesome. They can charge as low as 0.25%. Or is it? Think about this, okay? This is really good for you guys to understand because I would rather pay 1% than I would want to pay 0.25% because, right? Because paying 0.25% is a very, very low payment, right? And so that means I am not going to be paying very much back on my principal. So let's take a look at this. Let's see who wins, right? So if banks can charge you as low as 0.25%, so let's look at that. So if our interest rate, okay, is our interest payment is $518 a month, okay? And we then add the $56 that the payment is calculated to, okay? So remember how we calculate our payment. So if we take the $23,000 and you multiply it by 0.25% is our interest rate. So that means we're multiplying it by 0.0025%. So that means the payment that's going to your principal is $56. Whereas here, it's at least $230, right? So the lower this amount is, okay, the lower this amount is, this percentage is, the more detrimental it is to you, right? Because if we take the 518, like I said, plus the 56, we know our payment is 574. Looks like a good deal, right? If our payment's 574 versus 748. However, when you look at the interest volume, if you take 518 and divide it by 574, what do you think that is? Well, let's do it, right? Let's do it. So we have 518, we're going to divide it by 574, and that equals 0.9024. So guess what that means? That means you are then spending 90% of this, okay? Your interest volume is 90% that you're paying in interest for that payment. So you guys have to really stop paying these minimum payments because they are killing you financially. We have got to find a better way. Well, one of those better ways is the way of this student here, this student that Dan and I, helped through her finances, all right? So she is sitting in a situation where she doesn't have hardly anything as cash flow. She has a little bit, okay? But we all know that gets wiped out pretty quickly, right? With life events. So we were able to get her back her payments by splitting up her income into two separate cards, okay? And so this is one of the ways that we do this for you guys, right? Now, if you look, her credit score is a 626, so she doesn't have a whole lot of options. What we're hoping for is to get her to a point where she can get a line of credit to take care of some of these expenses for her so she can work all of her income in and all of her expenses out, right? Because when you work with lines of credit, you can utilize then your entire income. When we work with credit cards, there are certain things we have to hold out of our income, and thus we can't use the entire income to work it down, right? So some of those things are, rent or mortgage payments you cannot run through a credit card. You can't run your car loan through a credit card or any other loans or lines of credit. So you can't run any of those. You can run most of your expenses though, right? So your living expenses. Well, what are living expenses? Because I don't spend a whole lot of time talking to you guys about living expenses anymore. So I want to kind of go through that, briefly with you. So your living expenses are things like your gas, your groceries, your utilities, like Netflix, any subscriptions that you have, any of your, fun expenses, things you want to do, like go to the movies, right? So those are your living expenses, okay? And so in her case, her living expenses came to $2,366 a month, all right? Now, so let's take a look at this scenario and situation and see exactly what we did, right? So we know we're doing a split card strategy for her, okay? And we know that her credit score isn't super great right now, so she's going to struggle trying to get any other kinds of lines of credit to help her. But that's okay because we can use exactly what she has currently to do this and to get her some cash flow. So we know we need to get her cash flow. So how are we going to do it? Again, when Dan and I look at things like that for you, when we help you with creating a plan and when we look at plans for you, the first thing we want to do is find a way to get you guys cash flow. And that's going to be through your largest payments, okay? So your largest payments that we can look at that are usually lines of credit, right? Obviously, because you can't run loans through Velocity Banking because they don't revolve. So we have to use our lines of credit. So here, She has an income of $4,860 a month. She has total expenses of $4,814 a month, which means her cash flow is $46. Okay. Her mortgage amount is $130,000, which means her payment amount then is $809. She also has a car loan that she's been paying on a few years. Her balance is right around $12,000, so I wrote $12,000. She's paying $297 a month for that car, okay? So both of these, we know we cannot run through a credit card. So we have to hold those out of our income, okay? And so that's what I've indicated here where I say hold out 1106 because these two add up to 1106 and we know we have to hold that out of our income. So we do, all right? Now, she has a Chase card here for $23,000 and that's what I was showing here. Okay, and we know that her payment is $748 a month at 27% interest rate. So her payback amount is $16,596 if she were to let this run to term, running things the traditional way, okay? But we're not going to do that, are we? So that is how much she would pay, and it would take her just shy of 5 years to do this, okay, to term this out. Now, the next thing she has here is a Discover card, and that is at $19,800, okay? Again, rounding a little bit here. And so her payment is $594, and it is at a 24% interest rate, okay? Which means to term this one out, she'd be at $13,154. So if you were to add all of this up, what are we going to get? We get $29,750 for her debts, okay? That is the interest she is going to pay on her debts. Her payments right here, okay, so her payments are totaling $1,342, okay? Again, we're holding this out. And her debt payments here in her credit cards is $42,800. So $42,800 is what she's in debt for, excluding the mortgage, okay? And again, depicting here, showing you the living expenses. So when you add all of this up, it's going to equal her total expenses of $4,814, all right? Now, we know that her available income is $3,754. Well, how did I get that? Okay, so let's see. How did I get $3,754 as her available income? So what I did is I took her income of $4,860, okay, and I subtracted then off the 1106, right? Because 1106 is what she has to hold out because she cannot run that through her credit cards, okay? So we then hold this out of our income, right? Just as we're holding it out of our expenses as well, all right? Now, our available income then is the $3,754, which we know we have to split between two cards because she needs to get back both of these as income, right? I'm sorry, she needs to get back both of these, right? So these payments we have to bring back. So we do that through Velocity Banking by putting in our income into each one of these cards because that income then satisfies those payments. So that's why I didn't subtract these two off of our income because we already know that we're using these cards to put our income into, knowing we're getting those back as cash flow, okay? So then we have to take our living expenses and we have to divvy up our living expenses between these cards. Now, when you guys look at your living expenses and you're trying to figure out, what to put on your card, you're going to have to go through some calculations to figure that out, okay? And you're going to have to run a couple strategies to see what is going to be the best option for you. So for her, what we decided is that on the $23,000 card, we're going to split our income evenly actually, and we're going to put $1,877 on that card, right? Split again, $1,877. And so it's going to drop our balance to $21,123. And then the expenses that we decided to put were going to be $966, okay? So she split this up and she's putting $966 onto this card and she's going to put $1,400 onto the second card. Now, as you can see, the $1,400 is just her groceries. So she's going to dedicate one of those cards to nothing else but groceries for the family, okay? So that's what she's doing here, all right? So When we run our split card strategy, we know, right, through velocity banking, that's how we win through through the average daily balance and simple interest. Because your interest, right, is average then if we run it through the velocity banking strategy. So now what we have to do is figure out what the interest charges are going to be, right? Because we know we get back those payments, right? We get back these payments, but we do have to spend interest. There's interest that's going to be charged. So it is those payments minus the interest if you want to look at it that way, okay? So the way we calculate this is we're going to take our $23,000, okay? So 23,000, and we are going to then we know that our income comes in and drops our balance to 21,123. So we are actually going to add the 21,123 to the 23,000, which is going to give us the 44,123. We then divide that by 2, right? Because we want the average. So the average is going to be the 22,061. Now, that's the average the average that we would that for the month, okay? So the average for the month, but now what we have to do is we have to multiply that by our interest rate. Well, the $23,000 card is at a 27% interest rate. So we are then going to multiply that by 0.27. That's going to give us a year's worth of interest. That's our year's worth of interest. We don't want a year though, we want 1 month. So now we have to divide that by 12, and that is where we get the 496, okay? So that's how you calculate your interest, you guys, and you're going to do that then for both of these cards, obviously, to figure out, so you have a good starting point, so you know what you're going to be working with. Now, does that mean every month you have to calculate this like this and run it all down? No, it doesn't mean that at all, right? Because as Dan says, you guys are going to be living this. Once you set your strategy and once you understand how you're running your finances, you're going to just be living it, okay? And so within living that, you're not going to need to do these calculations so long as you do your checks and you know if you're going in the right direction or the wrong direction, all right? So if we run this and we have a starting point, we know that when we put our income in, it drops us to 21,123. But then our expenses come back into the account and so does the interest rate. So that means the credit card at the end of the month is going to be at $22,585. So we have to do some checks here. Is this $22,585 lower than the $23,000? It is, right? So we're running in the right direction. So that's a good thing, okay? Same as the second card there. If we take our 19,800, we bring our income in, it drops it to the 17,923. Then our expenses come back in, and then our interest comes back in. That means that we end the month at 19,700. Is 19,700 greater than or less than the 19,800? Well, it's less than. So we know that we are running in the right direction. So that checks out okay too. All right. So I always like to, hold this out and then reveal it for you guys later, right? So let's see what happens. We know that a card one, it takes us 35 months, and we are going to spend in that 35 months $10,137 in interest, okay? So we spend that in interest, okay? Now, it seems like a lot, and maybe it is a little bit of interest, but you have to remember, she is spending $29,750 with hardly any cash flow, and she needs something to work with, right? So she can pay these cards down, because she's not paying this down very fast at this rate, right? Okay, so now what happens is we have a second card here, okay? And so that second card at the 35 month mark, card 2 then has all of the income put on it, right? Because now this card is gone. At 35 months, this card is gone. So the income and the expenses then get rolled into this card, right? So that's what I have depicted here. All income and expenses run through. And at that point in time, it's going to be 11,600. All of the income and expenses run through it. At the time of the 35 months are up, that card is going to be at $14,788. But we have also spent $11,683 in interest, okay? So we know we've spent that in interest because both these cards are running simultaneously at an interest rate, all right? So when we end up putting all of our income that we can, again, holding this out, and we run all of our expenses, right? We know that it's going to take us 10 more months to finish this. And the interest is going to be at $1,505. So give me just a second and I'm going to show you what our totals look like at this point in time. Okay, so back with some final numbers for you. So now we've taken, and we know that after 35 months, we spent $10,137 in interest. And then at 35 months, we had to bring over all of our income and expenses and run them through the second card. But in the meantime, we know that $11,683 had been spent, right? And so we have our Chase card, 35 months, $10,137. And then I show here, we've got the Discover card. And at the 35-month mark, we have spent $11,683. All right. But we still have time left on our card, and we still have interest that has to be paid, right? So what we now know is that this card is done. So all of our income and all of our expenses then can be run through the second card. Okay. And so as we run the income and expenses through the second card, it then takes us another 10 months, and we have spent $1,505 in interest. All right. So when it's all said and done, and we add all of the interest up and add all the interest together, we then come up with $23,325. Now, you might be looking at that thinking it's a lot of money. And you're right, it is a lot of money. But you have to remember, she had no extra funds that she can work down debts with. Okay. So she's paying everything through her cards, or she's paying the minimums on every card, and it's a struggle for her. Okay. So when we put all of our income in and run our expenses out of these two cards, splitting them up, we are getting back this as income to us, right? So we're getting that back as income, and it's given her a way to breathe. Okay. When you're sitting with $46 in cash flow and that's it, there's nothing else, you guys know how stressful that is. It is ridiculously stressful because you don't have a lot of wiggle room there. And one event that happens, or, one thing you want to go and do, if you want to go to the movies, that eats that up, right? So this is a way for them to get back some extra money. And so that's what we did with her. Okay. So yes, $23,325 is a lot of money, but when you think about where she's coming from, right? Knowing that she's spending $29,750 to run this traditionally, okay? Here, running things income in and expenses out through Velocity Banking, she has saved herself $6,425. She's also cut time because it took 3.7 years to complete this. It would take 4.9 years to complete this. And so she has saved herself not only time, but she has also saved herself some money, right? Now, she is sitting here at a credit score of 626, okay? Of 626. So we know that right now it would be very difficult for her to get like a 0% card, which maybe she could move one of the balances over and continue to run Velocity Banking. That is an option for her, but it wouldn't be an option immediately. So that's something she could look at down the road. So maybe she looks at it in 12 months. Maybe she looks at it in 24 months, okay? Now, for her, I'd also consider doing a personal line of credit, okay? So personal line of credit could be another option for her, a very viable option. So that is another thing that she could do, right? So this is part of our split card strategy, our multi-card strategy, where you're running your finances through two cards, okay, alleviating the debts you owe by giving yourself some cash flow back, all right? So there's a couple options that she has, but if she did nothing else but run these through the cards, this works, and this gives her some savings in the end. How do I know it works? Well, because Dan and I did it, you guys. Dan and I did that. That was the first thing that we did. That is what we did when we found Velocity Banking. We didn't know we had a line of credit that was open and that we could use. So we ran this for a year and we saved ourselves a ton of money in the process, okay? So it's something that you could do. Now, one thing I wanted to talk to you guys too about, remember, you also want to make sure that you are using your micro pay strategy, okay? The micro pay strategy is important because if you slap down your income onto those cards and they are at their limit or close to their limit, there is a good chance that your credit card company is going to drop your limit on you. And if they do that, that puts you in a conundrum, right? Because you can't then, use all of that money that could be available to you in that limit. All right. So that can be detrimental to you. So you want to make sure that you're using that micro card strategy, meaning that if you have, let's say, $2,000 you want to put on your card, okay? If you have $2,000 you want to put on your card, then what you're going to do is you're going to split that up. So as your income comes into your checking account, you are still going to use your checking account for this instance, because you will then be paying your credit card every other day or every couple of days a smaller amount, so that it doesn't freak the credit card companies out, right? Thinking, oh my gosh, I just got this big chunk of money. They're high at their limit. We're going to lower things down on them, and we're going to save ourselves from more debts. Okay, so that's how they look at it. So really, you want to micro pay, and you want to put your income in smaller chunks, so that it trips the algorithm, or I should say it doesn't trip the algorithm, because that's how they figure out whether or not, you've put a bunch of money in, and that's when they drop your limits. So when you keep it with smaller amounts like that, you will then stave that off or keep that from happening. All right. Now, the other thing we've been getting a lot of questions about too are, the fact that people say they have bills due before their income hits the card monthly. So how can they run this strategy? Well, you guys can move your due dates. You can do that with a lot of these utility companies. You can do it with credit card companies. You can do it with your mortgage. So you can move your due dates if that will help you. And also that micro card strategy, that micro pay strategy, right? Because when you're putting money onto that card in regular intervals, as your bills come in, they're getting taken care of because you're putting money on that card. So that's also helpful to you. All right. So I hope you guys learned a little bit more about cards today. I want you to be really careful and take a good look at how your cards are being calculated, okay? How your interest is being calculated, whether it's that 1% or that 0.25%, right? Because that is what holds you in a world of hurt, especially if you guys are getting hit with these late fees or these over the limit fees and they keep coming in at you, then you're never going to find a way to get out of that. So one way to do that is to velocity bank your way out, right? Hope you guys learned something today, and I will see you in the next video.